Once again, happy Mother's Day to everyone. I see a lot of kids with their parents, adult kids as well with their parents here for this Mother's Day. And I know many of you families can relate to this little story that I'm going to tell about my mother. I've told this one before, so you may have heard it before. By the time I was 11 years old, there were 4 other little boys in my house. I'm the oldest of 5 boys, and my mother, my poor mother, was a stay-at-home mom for the time. So you can only imagine how crazy it was, right? She would be yelling and screaming at times, raising her voice. Don't touch that. Stop fighting with each other. Eat your lunch. Do your homework. Pick up your toys. And she had a superpower. It was absolutely amazing. I'm so grateful that my mother taught me this. Whatever was going on in the house, the phone would ring, and she would always pick up with her polite Kentucky accent and say, "Hello." Just amazing. My mother, no matter what was going on, had this power to be kind with words, no matter the circumstances. And I'm so grateful for learning that example from my mother. And by the way, my mom, who's following us live stream, I love you, Mom. I'll call you later this afternoon. So anyway, this is the second week of this spring message series that's all about the power of words. Our words matter, don't they? The thing is, so often we can be careless with our words. We can just dismiss the effect and the power that our words have. And on the other hand, maybe you were taught as a kid, like I was, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. That's false. That's not true. Because we know words can be destructive. Words can wound us. They can hurt us. They can even destroy us. But on the other hand, a properly placed word in our life at a particular time can lift up our hearts, can lift up our spirits with encouragement, with refreshment or renewal or healing. If you are going to throw in the towel in something, you're about to quit, it could be one simple word, an encouraging word that just impels you to keep on going. But words have power. They shape the direction of our life and everyone around us. We hear in the book of Proverbs this great saying, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Those who choose one shall eat its fruit." So we can reap death or reap life with our words. Whatever we say, whether we believe it or not or know it or not, we will enjoy its fruit. So by our words, we are speaking either life or death to our finances, to our relationships, to our marriage. And if you think about it, as I said last week, our ability to speak, our ability to communicate is one of the principal ways that we image God. We human beings are made in the image and likeness of God. And God, in the very beginning in Genesis, spoke and things came into existence. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God spoke and things happened. We don't have that power. But we are sowing seeds, as I said, with our words. And so how can we grow to sow seeds of life and love and power to grow in our own life? So in our small groups, we all were posed with the question this past week, what do you want out of this series? And I responded to that question by saying, I would like to be more peaceful in my thoughts and more clear with my words. That's my hope, because as I said last week, I'm preaching to myself, honestly, in this series. So what do you want out of this message series the next 5 weeks? Today, we're going to look at that, the source of our words, and I'll tell you, my mother will be very proud of this message because it's all about negative speech and how to avoid it and how to grow out of it. So think about this. If you had a recording of dinner last night, what would that look like? If you had a recording of the last 24 hours, everything you said, what would that be like? You might be a little embarrassed, right? Now, extend that to your whole past life, the whole arc of your life. No doubt, you and I have all said things that we regret From time to time, we've made blunders of speech that we desperately wish we could take back, things that wounded people. And you know what? I'm not talking about that today. Because first of all, there's nothing we can do about it. It's in the past. And maybe you can apologize to another person for whatever word you said. But I'm not talking about today occasional blunders, things of speech that we have just occasionally said. What I'm going to talk about is our patterns of speech, habits of speech that we so easily fall into, negative patterns that can really wear us down. And in order to look at that, I want to look at the second reading today, which is taken from the first letter of St. Peter. Well, St. Peter wrote this letter, that's in the New Testament, to a Christian congregation that was under persecution. And this is important. It's not just physical persecution, but verbal assault. And so Peter gives them and gives us some very practical advice. We'll pick up in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 9. He says this: "Do not return evil for evil, or insult for insult, but on the contrary, a blessing. Because to this you were called, that you might inherit a blessing. For whoever would love life and see good days must keep the tongue from evil and the lips from speaking deceit." Do not return evil for evil, insult for insult. Very challenging words. And you may think that that contradicts another thing in the Bible. You're probably familiar with this verse in the Old Testament: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's taken from the law of Moses. It's sometimes called the law of retaliation. And it actually limits retaliation. Only an eye for an eye, only a tooth for a tooth, no more. So it's meant to be a limit. But Jesus goes beyond and expands all of the laws of the Torah of the Old Testament. And this is perhaps the most challenging for us who are followers of Christ in all our actions and behavior, to turn the other cheek, to even love our enemy. And so Peter, following Jesus, is taking that with regard to our speech. He's advising us not to tolerate or to strive against any kind of sin of speech, no matter what the circumstances. So, what are those sins? Well, I could spend a whole series on this, but I'm just going to look at a couple categories of sins of speech that Peter hints at and that we can change in our life. And first of all, I'm not going to talk about one obvious sin of speech, and that's cursing or profanity, because it should be obvious that that's a sin of speech, and we should strive to have no tolerance for that in our life. Profanity, cursing, is like living in garbage. Nobody wants to live in garbage with a constant habit of profanity. Well, the couple categories I'm going to speak about are more subtle, and we can more subtly fall into them. The first one Peter hints at here in verse 10, speaking deceit. So he's quoting Psalm 34. "Whoever loves life, who wants to live long days, will avoid speaking deceit," lying. And I'm guessing that you and I have lied a lot. We tell little white lies, right? Little white lies about our age, about our achievements, things to make us look a little better, or perhaps to avoid an awkward conversation. Not necessarily anything sinful about some of those little white lies, but here's the problem. They so easily lead us to a habit of bigger lies. Bigger lies are extremely destructive to our life and for everyone around us. What do you think is the root of lying? It could be fear. It could be a lack of self-awareness or a lack of awareness of the world around you. I think at the root of lying, at its base, is pride, the sin of pride. Think about the last time that someone you love lied to you. It was extremely hurtful, right? Extremely, probably like a betrayal to you. See, lying, even one single lie, can destroy your reputation. One lie can destroy a career. One lie can destroy trust in an entire organization. If the root of the sin of adultery is a lie. And on top of habitual lying is the problem of manipulation, because a liar oftentimes gets other people on their side to be part of the lie. Now that's why lying is so dangerous, something to avoid. That's the first category Peter hints at here. The second one we have to read in context. A few verses later, Peter says this: sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Always be ready to give an explanation to anyone who asks you for a reason for your hope. But do it with gentleness and reverence, keeping your conscience clear, so that when you are maligned, those who defame your good conduct in Christ may themselves be put to shame. Well, Peter is saying, if you have Christ sanctified in your hearts, you'll have always ready words of hope. You'll give a reason for your hope, so that when you are maligned, you will put that other person to shame. So what is that speech that maligns other people? Malignant speech. It could be a lot of things. I think most especially it's two things. It's gossip and slander. Gossip and slander are related to one another. Both are about negative speech toward another person. Slander is always false speech, a lie that's directed to hurt another person. So in that sense, it's worse than gossip, because gossip may be true, may be false. However, prevalent gossip is destructive in its own right. If you've ever been part of the web of gossip, it's incredibly damaging and hurtful, just like lying and slander. The thing with gossip is sometimes we don't know if we're doing it. You think about it. So here's a good test whether or not it's gossip. Are you part of the problem, or are you part of the solution? And if neither, it's gossip, so stop it. And another thing, where do you think gossip comes from? It could come from boredom. It could come from wanting to feel good about yourself. Well, I have trouble with my kids, but look at Mrs. Smith and her kids, and that just puffs you up. I think the root of gossip and slander is the sin of envy, and that can be very damaging. And then I just want to add one more kind of malignant speech, which may be directed toward another person or the weather or anything else, and that is the speech that is complaining and groaning. Any kind of speech that we would describe as complaint. The thing about complaining is it's boring. Nobody wants to hear that complaint. And it takes up energy and time. It exhausts us. The ancient people of Israel spent 40 years in the desert, wandering and wandering. What were they doing in the desert? They were complaining and groaning. And that's a large part why they were stuck in the desert for so long. And that's what complaint does in our life. It just keeps us stuck. So my friends, I've talked about some general categories here. The good news is that we can change in all these habits of speech. So I think at the root of complaining and groaning is a lack of gratitude. A lack of gratitude for God and the world around us. At the root of gossip and slander, as I said, is jealousy, is envy. And the root of lying, and that terrible habit of lying, is pride. We can counteract all these things. Instead of being tempted to groan and complain, instead express thanksgiving. Be grateful. Say a word of thanksgiving, especially in the context of prayer, before God, who is the giver of all good things. And when you're tempted to gossip or slander, pray. Say a prayer for the other person who's that object of gossip. And if you're in a conversation, here's another word of advice about gossip: to kindly kill it with kindness, and say something nice about the person. So Mrs. Smith comes up in conversation. Mrs. Smith is such an amazing mother. I admire her so much. That'll kill the gossip. And the solution to lying is a little harder. but it's an attitude of humility. The solution, the antidote to habitual lying is to be humble and to be honest before one's soul and before the Lord. So, to cover all these things, I want to go back to St. Peter's words here. I just want to say that my mother taught me well. So thank you again, Mom. I love you. My mother taught me well, and generally speaking, I do sometimes, but generally speaking, I don't lie that much. I don't gossip that much. I try not to. I certainly don't slander, and I do complain sometimes, but not too much. But maybe you're like me. You want to do those things. You're thinking about it, especially when someone is talking about you or someone hurts you. You want to murder them in your head. And so how do we combat all these sins of speech, really getting at the root of our hearts? St. Peter says, instead of those things, do this. Speak a blessing, that you might inherit a blessing. This is how to be transformed in our minds, our hearts, and in our speech. Speak a blessing. Speak encouragement. Speak respect. Speak acknowledgement. Speak a blessing, and your heart will be blessed. You will inherit a blessing. But here's my challenge to you this week, and this is a big one. Monitor your speech this week, every single day. Big challenge. And perhaps, for an extra challenge, enlist somebody else in your life to help you. I bet your spouse and your kids or your parents will be very happy to be part of this exercise. I don't want to cause any fights, though. This week, the challenge is monitor your speech and see what those patterns are. Be aware of those patterns that you can begin to be more grateful. You can be humble before God. On the gospel, Jesus says that the Spirit of truth is going to come. He speaks of an advocate, the Spirit of truth that is within us. God desires that we live in that truth. We bring forth that truth in love in our words, in our speech, that we may transform our life, that we may bring positivity to everyone and everything around us. And so be humble before God. Be honest and seek out that transformation. Because bottom line, words have power. And God's words have God's power. So use that power. Amen. Together we profess our faith.